Welcome to the video lecture series based on Class 11, Sociology Textbook Introducing Sociology. I'm Olivia Dirinamai and I would be doing the Chapter 1, Sociology and Society today. And today we would be discussing 6 themes from the first chapter. These themes are the sociology imagination, pluralities and inequalities among societies, defining sociology, sociology and philosophical reflection, sociology and common sense knowledge, and sociology as a science. But before we move on to these topics or concepts, let's begin with some suggestions that are often made to young students like you. One advice often made is, study hard and you will do well in life. The second advice would be, if you do this subject or sets of subjects, you will have a better chance of getting a job in the future. Now the third advice, which we normally might get, would be, as a boy, this subject does not seem a correct choice or subject, or as a girl, do you think this subject is a practical one? The fourth advice you normally get or hear would be, your family needs you to do a job soon, so why choose a profession that takes a very long time? Or you will join your family business, or so why do you wish to do this subject? Now, let's analyze all these 4 suggestions that you have received. Don't you think the first advice contradicts with the other 3? According to the first advice, the onus of success rests solely on the individual hard work. Meaning, if you work hard, you'll be successful and you will get a good job. But the second advice suggests that apart from your individual effort, there is a job market that decides which subject choice may increase or decrease your chances in the job market. The third and the fourth advice further complicates the issue or the matter. That is, besides your individual effort and besides the job market, there is a gender, whether you're a boy or a girl, and your family background, which also matter. Thus, we can sum up that individual efforts matter a great deal, but it does not necessarily define the outcome. Of course, the individual students must study hard to do well, but there is a whole set of societal factors that play an important role in the final outcome. Now, if you talk about the job market, it is defined by the needs of the economy. The needs of the economy is in turn defined by the economic and political policies pursued by the government, depending on the needs of the hour or depending on the ideology of the present government. Therefore, the success of the individual student not only depends on his or her effort, but also depends on the broader economic and political measures as well as his or her social background. This is exactly what sociology studies. It studies society as an interconnected whole. It studies how society and the individual interact with each other. Now, let us begin with our first theme, that is the sociological imagination. We have discussed earlier how the individual and society are linked to each other. One of the tasks of sociology is to find out how the personal, that is the individual, and public, that is the society, are related to each other. So this term, the sociological imagination, was coined by American sociologist C. Wright Mills in his 1959 book, The Sociological Imagination, to describe the type of insight offered by the discipline of sociology. He defines sociological imagination as the awareness of the relationship between personal experience and the wider society. Now, according to Mills, one of the main tasks of sociology is to transform personal problems into public and political issues. What does he mean by this? His main point is that many of the problems faced by people have social roots and are shared by many others. For example, let us take the example of unemployment. Unemployment can be an extremely negative, private experience, And feelings of failure are common when one does not get a job or loses a job. But when the unemployment rate reaches up to, say, 11.6% approximately, as it is in Manipur today, it cannot be seen as the result of a personal character flaw or weakness of the individual. Meaning, when many people in a society face the same problem, one must ask, or one must rather ask, whether there is something within the structure of the society that is contributing to this problem. Meaning, when we have to ask, like, what is wrong with the society in Manipur? What is wrong with the policies and measures of the government that there are such high rate of unemployment? It is not just a personal flaw. It is not because the individual is not hardworking, or because the individual is not good enough, or not. Cannot blame it only on the individual. There is something, there is a bigger issue which is at play. That is what Mills means by saying that when a particular problem is faced by many people, then somewhere it has a social roots. Now, to have a sociological imagination, it means a person must be able to pull away from the situation that he is in right now and think from an alternative or a new point of view. Some might take this, let me remind you, or let me point it out to you. Some might take this sociological imagination as an excuse to not work hard. They might take it as an excuse to run away from the reality and to run away from their personal problems. They should not be so. Instead, we should use this sociological imagination in our daily life to change our perspective, to change our way of looking at things, to enable us to change our personal situation and make the society a better one. Now, that's it for sociological imagination. Let us turn to our next second theme, pluralities and inequalities among societies. In this contemporary or present world, there is no such thing as I belong to only one society. I belong to so many societies. I belong to so many groups. I belong to so many associations. If I go out of India, if I go abroad, if I go amongst foreigners, I would say, when I say our society, when I say my society, it would mean the Indian society. But when amongst fellow Indians, our society would mean my linguistic or ethnic community, or my religious or caste or tribal society. Now, for example, you as a student, after you pass your class 12, when you go for college, when you go to universities, supposing if you go to Oxford University in the United Kingdom, and there's a freshers party, freshers meet, where each and every one of you have to introduce yourself. You have to introduce yourself. You will introduce yourself obviously as I'm an Indian. You're not going to introduce yourself as I'm a Naga, I'm a Kuki, I'm a Meitei Pangan. Then people would be like perplexed. You would definitely, first of all, you would introduce yourself as an Indian. But now you don't go to Oxford University, you go to Delhi University in the capital of India, Delhi. Then you would definitely introduce yourself as I'm a Manipuri, or I am from Manipur, from the northeast part of India. You would introduce yourself as that. Now, if you don't go to Delhi University, if you go to Manipur University, and then you have your freshers meet, then if you are a Meitei, obviously you would introduce yourself as I'm a Meitei, or Meitei Pangan, or I'm a Naga or Kuki, or even within the Nagas and Kukis also, there'll be the Tangkhul, there'll be the Liangmais, there'll be the Zhou, Mizo, so many other subgroups again. So this shows that there is no such thing as a single society in the contemporary world. We belong to more than one society. And sometimes this diversity of society makes it difficult, especially for sociologists, to say which society we are talking about. And again, no society is equal. So many inequalities. Inequalities is one of the basic features of all societies these days. and especially Indian society, which has been very profoundly expressed by Amartya Sen, the Nobel laureate, in his famous book, The Argumentative Indian. Some Indians are rich, most are not. Some are very well educated, others are illiterate. Some lead easy lives of luxury, others toil hard for little reward. Some are politically powerful, others cannot influence anything. Some have great opportunities for advancement in life, others lack them altogether. Some are treated with respect by the police, others are treated like dirt. There are different kinds of, these are different kind of inequality, and each of them requires serious attention. Now that we have seen that how in contemporary world there's pluralities of societies and inequalities among societies, let us move on to our next theme of the lesson, defining sociology. How do we define sociology? Before we go into the various definitions of sociology, let us see what the word sociology means. The word sociology has been derived from two different words. Latin word socius, meaning companion, and the Greek word ology, meaning study of. So the term literally means the study of the processes of companionship or the study of human association or society. Now, there are n number of definitions of sociology by different sociologists belonging to different school of thoughts. Until now, there is no such single definition that is acceptable to all sociologists. So let us look at some of the definition very briefly given by some sociologists. Auguste Comte, who is also considered as the father of sociology because he was the one who coined the term sociology, he defined sociology as the scientific study of society. He says that just like natural science, we should also study sociology. Just like natural phenomena are subjected to certain rules and laws, social phenomena are also subjected to certain rules and laws. So, when we study society, we should study society in a scientific manner, just like we study other natural phenomena. Now, Emile Durkheim, another famous sociologist, he says that sociology is a study of social facts. Now, what are these social facts? Social facts are the things like family, marriage, kinship, education, law, the norms and the values of the society. Those are called social facts. Now, Max Weber, coming to Max Weber, he says that sociology is a science which attempts the interpretive understanding of social action. Mind you, not all actions are social action according to Weber. An action becomes a social action when it is influenced by others' action and when there is a meaning or a motive attached to the action. That is how Max Weber defined sociology as study of social action. Another sociologist, Ferdinand Tönnies, has defined sociology as the study of humans living together. Obviously, when humans live together, what will happen then? There will be interactions among them. There will be all kinds of different interaction amongst them. Now again, another definition by Park and Burgess, sociology is the study of collective behavior, of how people behave in the society. By examining all these different definitions, we can see one common thing in all this definition. And what is that? That is, sociology is the study of human beings, their society, their relationships and interaction in the society. So now, if we have to define sociology based on this above discussed different definition, we can define sociology in a very general manner. We can say that sociology is the study of human social life, groups and societies, and its subject matter is our own behavior as social beings. Now that we have briefly seen various definitions and we have given a general definition of sociology, let us move on to our fourth theme, that is sociology and philosophical reflections. When we talk about society and human beings, this is not the first time it has happened, nor is it only the sociologists who have started studying human behavior. It has happened in the past also. Many philosophers and religious thinkers have done so too. But there is a basic difference between how sociology studies society and how these philosophers and religious thinkers study society. The main difference is philosophers and religious thinkers, their focus is more on what is moral or immoral in human behavior, or what is the good way of living, or what is a good society. They are more concerned about what is good or bad, what is moral or immoral, Of course, by saying that this is their main focus and that there is a difference between sociology and philosophical reflection, it doesn't mean that sociology is not concerned with all these good or bad, with these norms and values. But the difference is that sociology focuses on these norms and values in relation to how they actually function in societies, in actual societies. Sociologists are not concerned with whether these particular norms and values is good or bad. Their main focus is what is the function, what is the role of these norms and values in that particular society. It means that when a sociologist studies a society, the sociologist is willing to observe and collect findings, even if they are not to his or her personal liking. He or she may not, the particular sociologist may not like that particular thing that, might not agree with that particular norms, may not agree with that particular values, but that is not involved in a sociological study. His aim or her aim or objective is to study the function of that particular norms and values. Now, let us go on to our fifth theme and see what is this, the difference between sociology and common sense. Common sociology and common sense. Many people believe that sociology is just common sense. Supposing if a sociologist says that he or she is going to research on a particular topic or particular social phenomena, then the people would say, it is a natural thing, it is a common thing. What is the need to study that? Why do you have to study that? What is the need? It has been there from before. It is like that. Well, what is the need to study? This is exactly what common sense knowledge is. It is naturalistic. Now again, common sense knowledge is unreflective, meaning it does not question its own origin or validity. It does not question whether that knowledge, the particular knowledge they have, is right or wrong. It does not question how did this knowledge come about, from where it comes about. It takes what it knows for granted. But sociology does not do so. It questions, is this really so? Is this valid? How did it come from? Where did it come from? Why did it come from? Sociology will start questioning all this, start questioning like this. Now again, another difference between sociology and common sense is that common sense knowledge is based on personal experiences. You have experienced certain things, that's why now you know that, okay, if I do this, this will happen. So that is your common sense. But sociology is based on experiments or observations and evidences. It's not just what I feel, what I have come across. It is based on experiment. You go and observe things, you go and experiment things, look at things, go out and look and observe. You collect data. You collect evidences and analyze it and come to the sociological knowledge. So therefore, the task of sociology is to look beyond the common sense. It's to look beyond the common sense knowledge and not just accept things as they are. Now, for a better understanding of this difference between common sense knowledge and sociology, let us look into the common sense or naturalistic and sociological explanation of poverty. Let us see how common sense or naturalistic perspective or knowledge explain poverty, and let us see how sociological perspective, sociology explain poverty. Now, for common sense view about poverty, why a particular person is poor, why he or she is poor is, or maybe he or she is poor because he comes from a problem family or a disturbed family or a broken family or a broken home, or maybe that person is lazy to work, so that's why he's poor, or maybe he's afraid to work, or maybe he does not know how to manage his budget, he overspends, he does not know how to allocate budget, so finances, that's why he's poor, or common sense knowledge, or he is not educated, he's illiterate, that's why he's poor. That would be the common sense or naturalistic explanation of poverty. But sociological explanation would be, he is poor because of the presence of the structure of inequality in society. He is poor because unemployment rate is high in his or her society, or because of chronic irregularity of work. There is no regular employment. He gets employment sometimes, he gets employment only twice in a week, once in a week. He does not have a regular employment, a regular work. Another thing would be, he may be employed, but his wages are very low. That's why he's poor. So, the naturalistic and sociological explanation is very different from each other. So I hope this clears up your understanding of how common sense and sociological explanation is different. Now, let us move on to the final theme for this lecture, for today's lecture, how sociology as a science. We've already seen in a previous discussion that sociology is different from philosophical reflections and common sense knowledge. And from its very beginning, sociology has always claimed that it is a scientific discipline. So what exactly does sociology do as a science, to call it a science? Or how does it employ, how does it employ scientific method? Or on what basis do they claim to be a scientific study? Now, sociology, like the other natural sciences, is based on many rules and regulations. Example, it is based on observation. For a scientist, for a natural scientist, he goes to his laboratory, go to his lab to experiment, to observe on certain natural phenomena. Likewise, sociologists also go out to the field, the social field, like his lab. The entire social world is the laboratory for the sociologist. He goes there to observe. Let's say, example, a sociologist wants to study the marriage system, the Hindu marriage system. Now, will he observe it in a lab like the physicist or the biologist? No. He goes out to the actual field, he goes out to the social world. Since he wants to study the Hindu marriage system, he goes to the society, he goes to a Hindu society and see how the marriage is being performed, from the rites and the rituals, and from the very beginning of how the marriages are arranged and how is it performed and what are the meanings of the rites and rituals and everything involved in the marriage functions. So that is the social world, is his laboratory. Now, like natural science, sociology is also based on objectivity or value neutrality. Now, what is this value neutrality or objectivity? Sociology is based on objectivity or value neutrality, meaning the researcher or the sociologist leaves his or her personal ideologies, personal beliefs, personal values and norms behind. It does not affect. He is not subjective but objective in his research. Like natural science, sociology is also based on evidence. It is not just based on hearsay, it is not just based on gossip or rumors or anything like that. The sociologists, they go out to the social field, they go out and then they observe the social phenomena, the particular thing that they want to study or research, and then they collect data, they collect evidences and come to a conclusion. and their analysis and observations can always be checked upon by others, can always be rechecked upon by others. So based on all these things, sociology claimed to be a science like natural science. My dear students, today we have done around 6 topics from the first lesson. We will be continuing with the rest in the next chapter. But so far today you have learned that sociology is different from common sense, and sociology is different from philosophical reflections and all these things. So the next time, learn to question. Do not learn to accept things as they are just because somebody says so, just because it has been passed down from family, it has been passed down to you from generation to generation. You should not just accept things as they are. You have to learn to question why, how. You have to learn to use your sociological imagination. That way, I believe that you'll be a better person. I believe that you will be able to change your society and live a more fulfilled life. Thank you.